this is kind of a dark horse of a game that kind of came and went. And this has a lot of connections to Alex joining Digital Foundry, actually. It's Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. It's still running on CryEngine. And that initial comment comes from the very first time that Rich met you. You went nuts just going through the console commands of KCD1. Thanks to the familiarity from Crysis, of course. You spent a lot of time in the console. And he's just like, oh my God, look at all this. This is great. You're just like doing all these tweaks. And that's when he was sold on you, Alex.
Yeah, that was a fun time. That had to have been February of 2018.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Yeah, it had to have been. That's awesome. Yeah, good memories there. This one is, I mean, we've already seen this revealed before, but this was a little bit, showed a lot more environments, emphasized a lot more humor, which I found a little, I mean, the first game is like the main character is kind of known as being kind of like a ditz or like a klutz. Yeah. He's not, you know, that he's a simple, relaxed
man. He's a simple man, but it's a very serious game overall, I would say.
Yeah, obviously dealing with serious historical things. And I did like everything they showed off in this trailer. At least from a visual standpoint. Characters rendering is always an interesting thing here because I actually liked the character models from the first game, but you could obviously see where budgetary and just time constraints led them, and perhaps technological constraints too. I'm actually not sure how much performance capture they did, PCAP. So I think this time around they did mention in their last video that they're doing like a more full performance capture. So I think the facial rendering looks good. Serviceable for what you're getting in this game, but it's mainly about like the environments and I think the interaction, like the granular interaction with the RPG systems in the game. And I think that's the really interesting thing here. There was one shot in the trailer when a character is being dragged along the ground by some soldiers where the reflections right next to them all made me wonder what I was seeing. Obviously, we're gonna have to wait for the final game to get out here. Yeah, we haven't.
That looks bizarre.
Yeah, that is bizarre. I don't know what that was, but we'll see when this comes out. They're obviously going to be using sparse voxel octree global illumination, which is this CryEngine staple since what feels like a decade now. Kind of crazy how they've been doing software ray tracing for a decade while everyone was just like, nah. But yeah, well, they'll be using that, but will they be iterating on CryEngine's technology for themselves? Will they be integrating later versions of CryEngine that we haven't seen? Like the last time we saw a modern version of CryEngine was like, oh my gosh, like even Crysis Remastered is like a weird hodgepodge of old and new CryEngine. So, you know, it's interesting to see. I don't know what they're going to do, but I'm excited to see when it comes out. And if it's anything like their last title, it'll be really, really pushing the CPU side of things. Like you could really scale that game back when it came out on the GPU quite well, just, you know, adjusting to settings and like that. But getting the CPU performance to be better was really hard due to the amount of AI and just the amount of stuff usually on screen. So I'm curious to see, they already announced that it's 30 FPS on consoles.
Wow.
With some sort of interview. So I imagine if it's anything like that, it's probably because like CPU. The first game, it's ridiculously, like the first game was ridiculously CPU limited. Like it was one of the most, at that time period, like we'd been on PS4 and Xbox One for so long. Everything was like 130 FPS on any CPU on PC. But this game was like, you're good, you're lucky to get 40. No, that's the kind of game it was.
Which is why it was always nuts that they managed to get it running surprisingly well on Switch. Like the version on Switch is pretty good, all things considered.
They did a lot for that. Really.
So it's pretty legit. I love, sometimes you gotta reflect back on yourself and what Digital Foundry does. And like this idea of like, if you look here in this puddle of blood where this person was just murdered, look very carefully around the wound. You can see the reflection of the, you know, that kind of, I think that's great.
I think we maxed out on that when we did GTA 5. You were there for that, Oliver. And we were like, well, if you watch this woman twist for like 30 minutes, you can see her hair dithered. And
if you look in the strip club, if you look at those feet, that kind of looks like RTGI, right, Alex?
Yeah, that was one of the better moments of Digital Foundry.
No, I think this looks really good for the most part. The lighting looks fantastic. The reflections, whatever they're doing with the reflections, there's some like kind of weird stuff when like the character opens up his helmet and the reflected detail, and it makes me think they're doing something beyond just SSR, although there are those weird artifacts when they're dragging that guy like you mentioned.
Yeah.
The way the metals look is really good. I don't know what they're doing for the reflections there, but it does look really good.
The metal looks awesome.
Really
I agree.
Yeah, it looks awesome. But yeah, I think this looks really strong. Just the characters aren't quite up that level, and it's kind of a bit of a, maybe not
hard to do.
Like, yeah, it's hard to do probably with given the scope of the title. It's a kind of harder thing to do for sure. But I think everything else looks really good. Those rolling fields of grass with like no real LOD issues, at least from what we can see in this footage, that all looks really good. So I think it's a title to look out for sure.
Also, they didn't show it. We've seen other trailers of this, like the gameplay reveal and this as well. They do a lot of great stuff with the first-person animation work, like swinging swords, using the different weapons. Like it actually looks really convincing and good, and that's actually something that you can't take for granted. It's like connecting the camera movement to the way that the arms move and everything. That can look awesome. There was also some really nice shots actually in the original trailer where you could really get that beautiful sort of like light spilling into the room look, which was like here. If you look at this shot right here, I think I'm such a sucker for that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Skylighting in a room,
skylighting in a room.
Yeah,
and there was some already impressive sort of windowsill lighting in the original that you could sort of enable that was quite heavy, but it looked awesome. If you remember that. But yeah, so that's looking great. I think that's coming out this year, isn't it?
Yeah, it should be. Yeah.
That'll be an interesting title to examine. We're happy to see CryEngine sort of return once again in a big game. We know Crisis 4 is obviously in development, and there's always Hunt, but it's nice to see there's still a non-Crytek studio doing something with the engine. And as you know, CryEngine is really well suited to large open outdoor areas with a lot of interactive foliage and just like granular detail in a way that sometimes maybe even Unreal Engine isn't the best. So
yeah, at least for performance, like I always feel like CryEngine obviously had its own quandaries for a lot of things, but it always felt like at least that performance was pretty stable. If it was just low maybe, but it was stable at least.